Hello, and welcome to the ESG Experience, the podcast about all things ESG and beyond. This is Season 3, Episode 2. Whether you're an ESG expert or just dipping your toes into the ESG universe, this podcast is for you. Together, we'll navigate the alphabet soup of ESG, share strategies, and discuss industry news and trends. I'm Helee.
And I'm Ryan Nelson.
As the leaders of Conservice's ESG department, we value the importance of telling the real ESG story. Today, we are honored and humbled to be joined by Maya van Rossum. If you're wondering if she has Dutch lineage, it was confirmed prior to the podcast that indeed she does. She is the founder of Green Amendments for the Generations, and we will discuss today what green amendments are. Full disclosure, I did not know prior to my preparing for said podcast, along with how effective are they, what is their value, and the long-term positive impact they provide.
Maya is the founder of the Green Amendment for the Generations movement and the leader of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. She has instigated the successful passage of green amendments in New York, Montana, and Pennsylvania.
Woo!
Yeah, I did not know that you'd gotten that far already. The second edition of her latest book, The Green Amendment, The People's Fight for a Clean, Safe, and Healthy Environment, is available now, just recently, I believe, wherever books are sold. Welcome, Maya.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I do have to make a little correction to my bio.
Please.
So I can't take credit from others. So in Pennsylvania, Montana, the Green Amendments have actually been passed quite a while ago. But it was in Pennsylvania that in my role as the Delaware Riverkeeper and my Delaware Riverkeeper Network breathed life into that Green Amendment, which we'll get to when we get there. But we breathed life into it because it had been ignored for literally decades. And yes, was part of the leadership in getting it in New York. So just want to make sure that I don't take credit for the passage of Pennsylvania and Montana, because that would be unfair for me to do so.
Yeah, but it was like your good energy being put out into the universe that helped push it over the finish. I'd like to think you had influence anyways, but that's nice of you to clarify and give credit where credit is due. So, okay, let's start simple for the layman, including me, the laywoman and the layperson. What is a Green Amendment? What is it?
So a Green Amendment is an amendment that's added to the Bill of Rights section of our state constitutions. Ultimately, we want to get one at the federal level as well, but right now we're starting at the state. And it recognizes and protects the rights of all people, including future generations, to clean water and clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. And because of its Bill of Rights placement and the way the language is crafted, what it does legally is it raises up environmental rights. So they're given the same constitutional standing and protection as other fundamental rights we hold dear, like the right to free speech and freedom of religion. We all know how powerfully those rights are protected because of their placement in the Constitution and how they're framed out in terms of their language. Well, now that same most powerful protection will come to bear for the environment if your state has a Green Amendment.
That's perfect. And thank you for explaining that. And then I have to imagine then too, there's some sort of like, as measured by what or as measured by how, right? Because clean air could be very subjective.
So it's a combination of things. First off, we have green amendments, as we said, in Pennsylvania, Montana, and New York. And in Pennsylvania and Montana, we've had a number of decisions that help inform that very question, right? So we've had courts and legislators really start to work on what does it mean to have a right to clean water and clean air. And the successes that we've had in those states will come to bear in other states. But the truth is, a Green Amendment is just like any other Bill of Rights provision. It intentionally uses broad language so we can provide that overarching, all-encompassing constitutional recognition and protection of a fundamental right. And then it actually gets informed through use and practice by legislators, by regulators, by the judiciary, just like other fundamental rights, right? Like we have a right to free speech. We have a right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. It has been over time and through use that we've come to understand what those terms mean. The same will happen with Green Amendment language.
It totally makes sense. And thank you for explaining.
Yeah, I'm really excited to learn about this, and just reading about it yesterday and reading a little bit of your book and this conversation. This is really fascinating to me. Just from what I gathered, I think of you as an environmentalist, and I really appreciate environmentalists, but now you're bringing this law expertise to the table and this very practical application. I think I saw you said, we go around very often and we say, I have a right to clean air. And you were kind of like, well, not officially though. We claim that we do, which I would suggest we do, even though it's not written in the Constitution necessarily, but we say, I have a right to clean air. It'd be nice if we could point to that somewhere, right? And go, see, it says right there, I actually do. So now we have to make the laws and do the use and practice or whatever it is that makes that true. So that's what you're trying to do, right? And you're doing state by state and then federally eventually?
Right. And that is exactly what we're working to do with the Green Amendment movement. So we do, as people, as humans here on this earth, we do have an inalienable right to clean water and clean air, a stable climate and healthy environments, just like we have an inalienable right to free speech and to life, liberty, and happiness and all of those things. But they only, as you say, they only have meaning. I mean, having a right to these things only becomes actually true if when that right is violated, you can enforce it. And so that's what a Green Amendment does, is it actually makes it enforceable and therefore meaningful. So it's not just a right we hold in our hearts and our minds, but it's a right that we can actually experience through our lives. And when our governments infringe on that right, we can do something about it. And right now, you actually can't do anything about it unless you're in Pennsylvania, Montana, or New York.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask. So unless you're in those 3 states, so like, does nothing protect me right now sitting in Illinois? Or I think about like the water crisis that happened in Michigan recently, or like in Mississippi too. I think there's a state of disarray with the infrastructure and it's not being fixed properly and they can't drink or shower with the water. And you hear about these things happening in this day and age. And you're like, how can infrastructure fail? How is no one held accountable or responsible? So is it true now that there is no, are we just depending on like the goodwill of the governments in those states to properly handle water and things like that? Does nothing protect us in states that don't have a Green Amendment?
Yes and no. So, right, all of those states, every state across the nation and at the federal level, we do have environmental protection laws that are supposed to protect our water, our air, our ecosystems, our drinking water, right? But the way those laws are written, they actually are written to legalize environmental pollution and degradation. They, as long as you go and get the right permit from the right agency, giving you permission to degrade the environment to X, Y, or Z level, then you literally, the industry is entitled to degrade and pollute the environment up to that level. And if they violate, then there can be an enforcement action. It's often up to government officials to decide whether or not they're going to enforce. And if they don't enforce, there's not much people can do about it. But the other reality is, I mean, we are really legalizing pollution and degradation. And so while maybe having one industrial operation located next to your community spewing X amount of Z toxic pollutant into the air is not going to cause cancer in kids or Alzheimer's or, impact through neurotoxicants, the capacity of children to learn in school. But when you get 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and they're all legalizing or legally discharging that amount of pollution, it literally piles up. But for every single one of those facilities, they are legally discharging that amount of pollution. And there's nothing to deal with the pileup because the law allows it. And so what a Green Amendment does is it actually lets us look at what's happening to the environment in context. And so when our government officials are permitting pollution or degradation in ways that does ultimately cumulatively cause harm, or when there's a gap in the law and so toxins are allowed to get into the environment because there is no regulation to prevent it, or when government turns a blind eye to devastating environmental consequences that are happening and are in violation of the law, but nobody's doing anything about it, the people can turn to their constitutional right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment to hold government accountable and try to fix the problem. Whereas absent the constitutional right, so much of what is happening in terms of pollution and degradation in our environments, environmental racism, where we're sacrificing communities of color and low-income communities and indigenous communities repeatedly. So much of that is very, very legal. And in the absence of a constitutional right that belongs to the people, in those situations, we actually don't have anything we can do about it. So it helps level the playing field.
So, Maya, that sounds pretty easy. Why don't you just go get this done in all the states and at the federal level?
Go right to the divisive question. Do it.
How do you get an amendment to a constitution? How do you achieve this?
So every state has a different process. And in some states, it's a little harder, and in some states, it's a little easier. But in every state, it really is very dependent upon the active engagement of we, the people, saying to our government officials that this Constitution belongs to us. And this Constitution is we, the people, telling you in government that we're giving you permission to govern over us. But when you govern, there are limitations. And amongst those limitations are you can't infringe on our fundamental rights like speech and religion. And now we want to add the environment to it. And so what we have to do is follow that process. Very often the process in most states involves either a constitutional convention, which many people don't want to do because it opens up the entire Constitution, or there are some states like Florida where you can actually do a ballot initiative where it's all about the people getting signatures and the amendment can go on the ballot for the people to vote on. But in most states, I think probably every state, there is this process. And in most states, this is the process that's being pursued. It's about having the legislators propose the language that the people want in legislation, proposing to amend the Constitution. That proposal has to be passed 1 or 2 times, depending on the state. And then once it's passed by the legislature, it goes on the ballot for the people to vote on. That's what happens at the state level. And the truth is, amendments are very accessible at the state level. They happen all the time. I mean, in the recent election, we just saw, right,
Yeah.
3 states add abortion rights to their constitutions. And that was just one set of amendments, constitutional amendments we saw in a variety of states. So they're very accessible at the state level. And given that states have so much power when it comes to environmental protection and regulation, it's very meaningful when we get it at the state level. But we do also need a federal amendment because, of course, the EPA and the Congress and the president have a lot of power too. And they're not subject to state constitutional law. So we need a federal green amendment to hold them accountable in terms of their behavior. In order to get a federal amendment, you need 3/4 of the states to vote yes before it can go forth. And, we can all, I think, imagine that if we were to try to do that right now, it's a non-starter. One, it's a non-starter politically, but 2, it's a non-starter because this is a new idea for so many people here in the United States of America. So we need to get people educated and excited and supportive, and our politicians too. And the way we're going to do that for a federal green amendment is the same way we're doing that for state amendments. We are educating people and organizing people and getting them involved. And as we do that at the state level, going state by state by state, getting passage of green amendments in the near term that are making this meaningful difference, we're also actually laying the foundation necessary to ultimately secure that federal amendment. But we don't want to hop to the federal too soon, because we want to succeed.
Yeah, no, that strategy is smart. It makes sense. And if I look at the numbers here, so more than 11,000 amendments to the Constitution have been proposed, but only 27 have been ratified. That's not an awesome success rate to start with.
Well, let's not wet blanket it here.
I mean, I'm just saying. So I think your approach is really smart, right? Because you get all the states, and then at some point it builds critical mass. All the while you're educating the people, rather than trying to shoot the moon on odds that are unfavorable to me. And I'm not even like a conservative person. I like to take risks, but that's a lot of risk.
Oh yeah,
but
11,000. Let me just repeat: 11,000 amendments. And 27
have been passed. So here,
ratified, which is
what's the percentage of that?
Interesting. But
very
again,
small.
Very small. 27 out of 11,000.
You're playing the long game, which is awesome. And the success at the state, it's great to hear how much power. What'd you get there?
It's like 0.24%.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we can still do it.
Yeah.
That's the point. It wasn't zero. It wasn't zero. It's 27. So yeah, we can do it. And you're saying, and that's really promising to hear that to your point, the power that the states have in engaging on these things and the accessibility. So that's great. The other thing I thought was mildly interesting, and maybe it's just a shock factor point. I searched kind of the summary page of these 27 that have been ratified at the federal level, and I did not find the word earth, water, air, or health anywhere on the page. What I did find was the most recent amendment that had been ratified was about protecting the compensation of senators and representatives. So that was pretty
interesting. Well,
yeah,
we do.
I was going to mention or kind of draw a parallel. So people ask me, right? I've been in ESG essentially my whole career, almost 20 years. And people say, well, do you worry about, the political climate, depending on who's in office? Is ESG just going to go south, or like, does it depend? And I often explain that a lot of what we're doing, it doesn't necessarily come from like a federal mandate. It might come from private money mandating it, or it might come from employees demanding it. Or in some cases, we do have legislation and policy, but similar to what you're talking about, it's municipality by municipality or state by state. So a lot of states or cities or municipalities have passed mandatory energy ordinance disclosure type things, where the city of Chicago says if you're a commercial property and you're using energy and creating carbon, you have to disclose your usage. And the entire state of California and the entire state of Colorado and the entire state of New York. So when I first started in this, there was maybe 8 or 9. Now there's like 47. And these are grassroots, state by state. The momentum has continued to build. It's not influenced by what's happening federally. So it's a way to get stuff done. And they're even getting a bit more stringent now, where they're saying it's not just about disclosure and transparency. That was the first step. But as we educate people and gain the critical mass, like you're saying, if you were to put out punitive legislation out of the gate, where you're going to start fining people, and you're like, people are just going to be averse to it. Like, whoa, don't fine me. I don't even know what this is or what you're doing. So it's very gradual. First, it was like, just report it. Just be transparent. You're not awarded nor penalized if your building is a guzzler. Now you're starting to get, the cutting edge, the bleeding edge to say, we are going to fine you if your building's a guzzler. But it happened like slowly, and people had time to prepare for it and get educated and know their building was a guzzler for a long time and take measures to improve. So anyways, I see the parallel in that approach. And I do believe that that's the only way to get stuff done, right? Especially when it comes to the environment, which unfortunately is a divisive political issue, when it should just be like, an issue of humanity and whatnot. And end speech, I will step down now.
Well, I love that. No, I love that what you were saying, because another parallel that I see, in addition to everything that you so beautifully laid out, is that it really is a movement that is coming not just from understanding and appreciation, but from people in the real world that are being harmed or benefited, right, by what is happening. And so we can all tell, whether it's around ESG or whether it's around, clean water and clean air or whatever, we can tell real stories about going down our pathway has helped people, and how failing to take meaningful action has resulted in harm, whether it's human health harm, environmental harm, or economic harm. And we can also show that when, people do things the right way when it comes to the environment, there are human benefits, environmental benefits. There are also a lot of economic benefits. And so it's sort of wherever you fall out in your personal priorities on these kinds of issues, there's something in it for you. There's a reason for you to get behind it and help push the ball up the hill. And so I see that as another benefit, because these are messages that really resonate with real people. And as a result, we can make them resonate with the decision makers, the government officials that need to help us get this ball ultimately over the finish line, even when in the case of a constitutional amendment, the final cross over the finish line is entirely up to the people when they vote at the ballot box.
No, it makes sense. So Maya, what do you do? So you're obviously a passionate environmentalist. I think, we're 3 like-minded people sitting here playing off of each other's ESG, green bean, environmentalist beliefs. What do you say when you come across people that are just like, global warming isn't real, like climate change isn't real, none of this matters? Like, how do you even, do you try to like educate them, or do you just leave them for dead, or how do you handle it?
Well, it depends on the person, and it depends on how they're framing that out. If somebody is a denier of facts and science, you can tell whether there's value in spending the time on that conversation. Now, I'm not, ultimately, if you were to converse with people and educate them long enough, maybe you can bring them around. But the truth is, we all have limited time and limited resources. And when it comes to this Green Amendment movement, and protecting people from contaminated water or air, or protecting us from the existential threat that the climate crisis is, we really actually only have a limited amount of time. So we need to focus our energy and resources. So there are some people, it's just frankly, to be perfectly honest, it's just not worth it. But there are a lot of other people where it really is. I mean, we have farmers that have had their entire operations shut down because the water that they use to irrigate the farm, to water their dairy cows, has been contaminated by a man-made family of toxic chemicals called PFAS. Those chemicals were allowed to proliferate in the environment because there was no regulation at the federal level or the state level to stop it from happening. In fact, to this day, in many places, there are not limitations, and there are not federal regulations that prohibit its use in a way that gets into the environment. There are just what they call advisory limits. And that toxic water has not only decimated the health and the lives of people, giving them really serious illnesses, but in the case of like a farmer that very often are viewed as very conservative people, they have literally lost their lives and their livelihoods that a farm that's been in their family for generations. Somebody like that might not instantly say, hey, I believe in that right to clean water. And in fact, often they don't. But when we talk with them about how having this constitutional right could have helped prevent that chemical from getting into the water and resulting in their losing their farms, they start to rethink it. They reframe it, right? They understand now the direct connection. And so there are very often when we just have real conversations with people about how having this right will help them in their real lives, we can get people to open up their hearts and open up their minds. I mean, the truth is, fundamentally, I don't care what your political affiliation is. We all know we need clean and healthy water and air, right? And healthy environments to live, survive, to thrive, and to have a healthy economy. And so ultimately, we can bring everyone around.
Of the water when it falls from the faucet to here to like where it came from. Some people can only think from, it's here and then it falls out.
Right. And this is about, and by the way, and that is, it's another interesting point. This really is about, as you said, not from the faucet into your glass, but it's about what's happening out in the environment, in the ecosystem that's resulting in contamination in the water getting to your faucet or not.
So in the example of the farm, I'm just curious. So absent a green amendment, there's no ramifications, there's no avenue, there's nothing this farmer could have done to say, hey, state, hey, someone, you're destroying my farm, there's contaminants in the water, there's literally no protection from this, it can just happen.
It could just happen. Now, they can try to bring some other kind of lawsuit where they either try to go primarily probably after the company making some sort of nuisance claim or some other claim of economic harm and use some other legal theory to get at the problem. But when it comes to what the government has failed to do, which is take any action to stop the proliferation of those toxic chemicals from being used by industry in a way that gets into the environment, there really aren't many options because there is no legal,
there's no law. Yeah.
There's nothing. I mean, it's literally a big gaping hole in the law over that entire aspect of this man-made family of chemicals. And it's the chemicals, right, that are in, well, you get the point.
I get the point. Did you ever see the movie Erin Brockovich?
Oh, of course.
You remind me of her. Like, you got all this energy about the water. They're poisoning the kids. And that was a long time ago, and we haven't done enough.
Not that long ago, though, right? We both remember it.
We both remember the movie, but I feel like it happened. It took place. It's a true story, right? But it took place like we've made it's 2022. I used to love that movie at least 20 years ago. I don't know. And it was at that time, like a historical timepiece thing. So I'm just sad that we've made no progress or minimal progress since then.
Interestingly, I was recently on a panel with Douglas Brinkley, and he's like an author of historic books, and he recently wrote a book that was sort of about the evolution, the growth of sort of the environmental legal environmental system that we have, like the passage of the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and the Endangered Species Act. And he talked about JFK and other politicians and how much they appreciated the environment and the steps they took to make those laws pass and come into play. And to me, right, when I think about that story, when I was with him on the panel, I was just thinking about how at that time, right, like our democracy and the way politics worked, it worked exactly the right way. Positive action was taken to protect people by passing positive laws. And those laws really were meant to be a first step. You know how I talked about how the laws legalize pollution and degradation? They literally say you can pollute and degrade as long as you have this permit. Well, I think that those laws were meant to be a first step, not the last step. But after those laws passed and industry was subject to limitations on their bad behavior, frankly, they got a hold of the democratic process. They started to use their lobbying and their money power and their political shoulder rubbing to get politicians to reapproach environmental protection. So it was now more about an entitlement of industry to pollute than an obligation to protect people's health and safety and lives and livelihoods. And so that whole process of progress towards environmental protection stagnated and stopped, even started to roll back. And so that's, to me, what happened was our democracy worked really well to make important initial progress, and then our democracy was co-opted and used against us to prevent further progress and to result in rollbacks. And that's why we need the Constitution, because when we have a constitutional right, all laws and all government action that advance and are taken are supposed to advance and being taken in service to accomplishing the constitutional rights, obligations, and goals. In this case, a clean, safe, and healthy environment. And so when our laws fail us, when our government fails us, when things stagnate or roll back or there are gaps, we can say, wait a second, government, you missed the mark, right? I have this right. And then it really is very literally the people using our power to hold government officials accountable and to make things right. Because that's really what government is. And that's what the Constitution is. It is about we, the people, agreeing to this system of governance. And putting in place ground rules, which are laid out in the Constitution. A critical ground rule that was ignored by every state constitution and the federal Constitution was the environment. And we're just setting that right now.
Yeah, it's almost kind of a terrifying story you told there over the last several decades, how there was interest and concern and effective use that was then kind of turned on its side. So I can't, I like to keep saying how much I appreciate the long game and the big systemic change you're going for, an approach we're going to take by, leapfrogging everything else, saying, okay, now let's put the blanket statement out there so we can fit everything else back into it. So how are you, maybe tell us a little bit more about exactly how you're doing. You're talking about these conversations that you're having. I agree, by the way, with spending very little to no time with, the people, deniers, or however you want to call it. Like some conversations, you just move on to where you can have a conversation. How are you doing that? How can we help? How do others get involved other than reading your book? Which we'll get to, but other than reading your book, what are you doing? Do you have a team of people? You're in California right now. Is that for this purpose, or what's it look like, the effort?
Yeah, so I am in California for the Green Amendment purpose, and I was just in Texas, and so I do go around by Zoom or in person to do this work. And the thing is, I personally am located in Pennsylvania, and my Delaware River watershed, which is my other job, right? That's New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. I am not going to pass a constitutional green amendment in California or Texas or Maine or Florida or Washington or Hawaii, right? The people of that state have to be the ones that take on that leadership role. So what I try to do, and the thing is, it's a very simple concept, right? We all have an inalienable right to clean water and clean air, and we need to demand that and secure that. So it's a simple message, but it can be kind of complex to get right. Because the truth is, almost every state constitution talks about the environment, even environmental rights within their constitutions, but only the 3 states, Pennsylvania, Montana, and New York, put environmental rights at that highest constitutional level. And that's because the other states didn't do it the right way. So what my job is, the way I view sort of my job, my mission is to inspire people to want to follow this path, and then to become their partner to help them be the leaders that can make it happen in their state through educating them, partnering up with them, being the one that can take on the difficult legal arguments or industry challenges we know will come. But, it's hard for people to pivot in the moment and take those on and see very quickly and clearly why an argument that's being presented is false, right? Like pitting economics against environment, for example. So it's really about partnering up. And that's actually what I really not only offer, but I really ask and urge, is I do say to people, if you want to be part of this movement in your state, if you want to be the one to make it happen in your state, please get in touch with me so we can partner up. I want to help lift you up so you can help make this happen successfully. And I suggest that in order to make my Green Amendment vision and movement a success, I need leaders in every state. I need them to be the leaders, right? Like the California populace and elected, they're not going to listen to me, right? They're going to listen to another Californian. So success requires grassroots on the ground leading the way. But I would suggest that I also have a critical piece of the puzzle to make sure that as the movement advances in one state or another, we help keep it on track and make sure that the right language, the strongest language, the best language is the language that we secure. And I'll say in every state, the movement begins in a different way. Sometimes it was an interested organization that called me.
That's what I was going to ask, actually. That's exactly what I was guessing. The same type of organization each state, or is it different? Like, who are your partners or advocates in the state?
Yeah, sometimes it's different everywhere. So sometimes it was an organization that called, sometimes it was a legislator, sometimes it was a person that heard a podcast like this and picked up the phone and called me. And then in terms of the partners, they're different in every state too, because every state has different partners, right? And different leaders. And sometimes it's individuals, sometimes it's organizations. And the language is different because every state has its own personality. And so in the over dozen states where we have Green Amendment proposals put forth at this point, the language is different in every single one. And that's by design, because I work with the community and the leaders to help them put forth the language that best reflects their priorities and the uniqueness of their states and their grassroots movement that's taking the leadership role on this. None of it's cookie cutter. And that's by design. And that's why this movement matters so much to me, that I can partner up, because I don't want anybody to co-opt this great idea to make money and to suggest you could just cookie cutter it and it'll happen. That's not true. This is about saving the world. And if we're going to save the world, we have to do it right. And sometimes that takes a little bit of extra time, but the time is worth it.
Love it. And you almost answered another one of my questions. It's like you're following my stream of consciousness. You said about a dozen in progress. Are any other states like getting close, or like of the dozen-ish out there, do you anticipate how many to get done next year, or like what do you think?
Did any get done yesterday?
Yeah.
Well, New York got done yesterday. Well, last year, yesterday.
Okay.
But I think the most powerful progress is happening and opportunity for near-term success, I would say, is New Mexico and Maine. And in part for New Mexico, because their constitutional process just requires a majority vote of each of the legislative houses once. And once that happens, the amendment goes right before the people next November. And they can have a Green Amendment. And we have really powerful constituencies there and positive energy. But other states where there's a lot of progress, and we have the opportunity for, I think, near-term success, are New Jersey, Delaware, Washington, Hawaii. Those are 4 states where we have a lot of progress. And then we have a lot of other interesting states like Iowa and Arizona. We have champions who are really interested. In Florida, their amendment approach is very different. They're really focused on the water first, and theirs is happening entirely by ballot initiative and is very much totally in the hands of the people. And that has real opportunity for progress. So it's different everywhere. And you don't have to wait to have the amendment actually added to start to get the positive benefits of this pathway. Because as people learn about how the law works, as people start to be empowered to understand that standing up for fighting for the environment in your backyard is not something to be ashamed of. If somebody calls you a NIMBY or a tree hugger or a fish lover or a job hater or a people killer, so what? You're entitled to this right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. And so too are future generations. And we really empower people to change the way they think about and talk about the environment. And that changes the power of their advocacy and how they talk with their government officials. And it also becomes a really powerful organizing tool to bring different aspects of the environmental movement together in this one common cause. And then we start to see different movements like working together. So very often you have an organization that does water and one that does air and one that does land conservation, all these. But with a green amendment, all are benefited when we ultimately succeed. So it also becomes a great place and space to bring all those different aspects of the environmental movement together, to start to work together to build trust and understanding and collegiality and synergy. So just pursuing a green amendment, what I have witnessed, starts to build powerful benefits for the environmental movement overall.
I like that attitude or that thought process too, because if you peel back the very basics, like you ask any human being, regardless of political affiliation, do you like water that doesn't poison you and your family? Do you like air that doesn't choke you? Do you think animals should live? Like there's such, like, who would openly disagree with any of that? But it's like this, it's become a divisive thing, and you can't be an environmentalist if you're also affiliated with certain party. There's nothing, it should be, I feel like we have to try to divorce that notion. Like the environment it shouldn't be a divisive political issue. It's simply just like a human right. But it's hard to undo that thinking because it's already been put, on that agenda, and it's over there. And if you're over here, you can't be over there. But if you really peel it back, you'd be like, okay, so you're over here. Do you want to die? Like, do you want to be poisoned? Like, that's all that's trying to happen here. Right. So
it reminded me actually, as a kid, you guys just both reminded me, you two reminded me, the tree hugger comment. As a kid, I remember unpacking the fact that there was a negative connotation to tree hugger, and then going, wait, what? Tree hugger? Like you hug a tree, like you love trees. I'm like, what's the negative part? And like someone having explained to me, well, it came about because this, so they're making fun of those people, and just the utter confusion. So I learned about both like environmentalism and politics or whatever you want to call it at the same time, because they're like, that is so weird. Like I'm pretty sure I would want to associate with being a tree hugger, and that's really weird that you would say that that's a bad thing. Long time ago, but it's an interesting. Of
all the issues, like that's hard to put your shoes in the, and try to empathize with the other side. Like there's other issues where you're like, yeah, I could maybe see, that's not my train of thought, but I could see where those people are coming from. I could see how they think. This is one that's hard for me. Like I really don't understand the alternative thought process on the environment and destroying it and having clean, or even simpler, clean air, clean water, like you said. So
yeah, really the only opposition we get is fear mongering. It's industry saying, oh my God, the sky's going to fall if you do this. There's going to be no economic development. All industry's going to shut down. There'll be no new developments. Nobody's going to be able to live anywhere or do anywhere. It's like, no.
Jobs. Yeah.
No, if you can advance your industry, your action, your activity in a way that protects the environment, that's what this says. And I would suggest to you that there is, that there is always a way to do it. in a way that is protective of the environment. Now, there might be some streams of industry that actually you can't. Like you can't make fracking for gas from shale safe. I'm sorry, 100% you can't. But you can make energy that can fuel our communities and our economy in a way that is safe and protective of the environment. So part of this too is like, how do you frame the question? Like, how do you frame what you're trying to accomplish? But there's always a way to do it in a way that protects people and the environment at the same time. And the truth is, if your industry or the way you operate your facility requires you to be able to discharge pollution to a level where it's giving kids cancer and it's resulting in adults with Alzheimer's, not acceptable. I don't want you. Right.
It seems so obvious, but yeah, it's hard to. Someone tried to talk to me about, well, you hear, is it without the economy and the environment wouldn't exist? We were trying to do chicken and egg on environment, economy. That it's just utterly confusing to me to make an argument on that case. But yes, at some point it's like, well, then you can't have this. Then collectively we're going to go, okay, then let's move on and do it the better way or a different way. Or I mean, it seems so obvious, but certainly the person or the individual or the industry, your natural reaction is to defend yourself and fight for yourself and not think about I have to protect myself first. But even that, collectively, I imagine that we can get past it.
Oh, go ahead, Maya.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, look, the fossil fuel industry, right? They've got gobs and gobs of money. Take your gobs and gobs of money and stop drilling the next well, but now start to build the next solar field or the next wind turbine. They're always advertising how they're all in on energy and trying to invest in clean and renewable energy options. What this would say is, yeah, do that. Do it faster and do it right now. Right?
Don't just do it to put it in your CSR report, your brochure, and be like, oh, look, we did a little solar too. I was just it's a shout out for Todd if he's listening. There's like some cartoon or meme, and it's like a guy gathered around a campfire in like a post-apocalyptic world, and it's something like, I'm gonna botch it, but it's something like, and yes, children, there was an Earth. We destroyed it, but for a brief moment in the history of time, we created value for shareholders, or something like that. Like, it's a good little cartoon.
It is good.
Yeah.
I need that cartoon. I need you to find it and send it to me. I'd love to share it.
I will.
Well, Maya, we really appreciate the work that you're doing and playing the long game and going for systemic change, and look forward to following your success. I do have a little game I'd like to play. It almost seems silly with these important things you're doing, but it'll help us tell another story here. So if you'll bear with me, it's a listener favorite. I'm just going to say the name of a place, and you have to guess 50-50. Either they are a craft maker of coffee or they're a craft maker of beer. Beans or beer. You just guess which one. This place is called Homestead.
Coffee.
That's right. Do you know it?
No.
Okay.
Oh, but Homestead.
Yes, like that's right. It's coffee. You're right. But it is located in a 19th century barn alongside the scenic Pennsylvania towpath, just steps from the Delaware River. And their claim is we create better relationships with Earth and each other. But I assume they are utilizing clean water thanks to your other project. Would that be possibly accurate?
That would be 100% accurate.
You're literally a river keeper?
Yes, I'm literally the Delaware River keeper. And so if I'm not advancing the Green Amendment movement, although part of my Green Amendment work is Delaware River keeper work because it's an outgrowth of that work, but I spend all of my time working to protect the Delaware River, its tributaries, and the whole watershed. And we do have a lot of wonderful water quality, and that is in no small part because of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network and all the wonderful communities I have the honor of working with to protect her.
You're making me feel quite useless in life, but I sincerely appreciate
your... her to have you do that?
Oh, yeah. For the first time, I feel useless. But no, really appreciate all the things you're doing and the ambition that you have, and thank you for that incredible work.
Thank you for what you're doing. It's really, really nice. Appreciate it. And
Well-
nice to meet you today. And I could keep talking to you. I don't know, listeners may be getting bored, but I could talk to you for 3 more hours. We've never had a 3-hour episode.
No, should we have
It's
our first
very
3-hour podcast?
interesting. Maybe we do a part 2, but we'll let you know. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing. And I learned a lot that I'll be talking about in my circles. So this has been another episode of the ESG Experience podcast. We appreciate our tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of listeners for joining us. And if you did enjoy your time with us, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast directory. And there's a new episode every month. Thank you for continuing to listen and support our podcast. And if you do want to continue the conversation between episodes, follow us on your favorite social media channel at #ESG Experience. Thank you, Maya.
Thank you, Maya.
Thank you for having me and for all you do.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.